If you've been thinking about starting a creative business for a while now, you might be feeling quite overwhelmed or even a little bit fearful of where to actually start. There's so many reasons initially when you're starting that creative business why you might feel fearful or why you might feel overwhelmed, but I think the most important thing at the end of the day is to start. I've absolutely experienced this during my lifetime, and when I started my creative business over 15 years ago now as a photographer, I really struggled in knowing where exactly to start, and I had very little business knowledge overall. In today's video though, I'm going to be talking about some ways that you can potentially overcome that fear of starting a creative business, and whether your creative business entails social media, so whether you want to start a YouTube channel or whether you want to start a TikTok or an Instagram account specifically for your creative work, I think that this all kind of comes under this umbrella. So today I really want to talk about that and really give some solutions to those of you who may be struggling with a bit of fear surrounding this. But for those of you who are new here, hi, my name is Kaylee and I'm a beauty and fashion photographer based near Sydney, Australia. But I'm also a content creator, and I started this channel a few years ago to talk about all things social media, content creation, business, and freelancing. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about some of the ways you can overcome fear when starting a creative business and how to actually just get started. Now, obviously, as much as I'd love this video to help everyone out there, I know that everyone's got their own individual circumstance, and some of these things may not just be as easy to do as it is for other people. So I'm obviously going based off of my own experience here and what I felt really helped for me in the end, and hopefully that will help some of you out there if you're starting to feel fearful of starting a creative business and you're not sure where to start. So as a bit of background on myself, and I have spoken about this before on my channel, when I first started my creative business as a photographer back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, around that time frame, I was incredibly shy. I was only about 18 years old when I started to actually take on paid work for photography, so obviously my business mindset was definitely not there at all. I had no knowledge of how to start a business. I had done a whole diploma in photo imaging for 3 years, and I came out of that diploma and I had no idea what I was doing in terms of starting a business. I just had no idea where to start. I think for my personality type 2, being an INFP, I don't really feel that I'm as well equipped as some other people for business, so it was, I would say, a little bit more of a struggle for someone like me getting into this. I had a lot of issues with my own confidence, and even when it just came to simply speaking to people, and that's why I actually felt very delayed in getting paid work from my photography as well, because I'd already been shooting for a number of years, probably since around 15 years old, and I just really didn't have the confidence to go out there and start earning money from it. I didn't have a lot of confidence to actually go and work with models because I was doing mainly fashion and beauty kind of stuff, so I really wanted to do more of that, but I was way too self-conscious, way too scared of actually working with teams of people. So whether that was going to be a makeup artist or a stylist or other models, I just did not have the confidence for that. That was really something that I very much struggled with initially when starting my creative business. Even starting to get into doing things like weddings was very, very intimidating for me, because obviously you are the photographer on the day, you can't really afford to screw up. And not only that, but you are walking around in front of sometimes hundreds of people, and it's just a very intimidating experience, especially for someone who lacks a lot of confidence like I did. But one of the things I'm first going to talk about today that I think really helped me start in the end was that I actually got to the place of being quite depressed about my entire situation of actually starting my business, and I felt like I had prolonged it enough already. It had already been 3 to 4 years or so, and I wasn't earning money from it. I was stuck in a job that I really didn't like, and I wanted to move on from it, and I wanted to be a photographer, and I felt like at that point it was hard to convince other people that I was actually going to go out and do this. And I think in the end, the switch that flipped for me was that I'd seen another girl who I'd used to talk to online, on online forums, from just doing some other creative ventures. I'd seen that she was becoming really, really popular on DeviantArt with her photography, and she'd really taken it to the next level. I'd known that she had been doing photography for a couple of years like me, but she hadn't really been taking it too seriously. And then I saw in this particular time frame that she had started getting amazing amount of attention on DeviantArt, like absolutely just killing it with her work. And I think it just kind of made me cry in one aspect, because I was like, oh my God, what have I been doing all of this time? This whole time that I could have been growing with her and basically growing my own work and really putting it out there for people to see and improving and evolving, I hadn't done any of that. I was too scared. I was too scared to start my business. I didn't know what to do. And obviously me and my personality at that time, I just preferred to shrink into my little turtle shell and not come out a lot of the time. So when I saw this happen and I actually saw someone else doing it who was my own age and really starting to kill it, I think it actually really inspired me, but it also made me feel a little bit shameful, which I kind of feel sad about now because I don't think I should have been necessarily shameful. I was only like 18. I was so young, but at the same time, I think sometimes it takes little things like that to just kick you into gear and maybe find that inspiration for you or find someone else's story that's really resonated with your own on getting started in a creative business. I think it was at that moment that I decided to finally draw the line and say to myself, okay, no more. I'm not going to dance around this any longer. I am actually going to start. I'm going to do this. And I specifically remember this moment of sitting in my room crying and just being like so upset with myself that I couldn't have motivated myself to do this earlier. But I just really drew that line and I actually said it out loud. I really committed to myself that I was going to do this. I literally said to myself, I am going to become a fashion photographer. I am going to start photographing models and I'm going to do this. I am not going to be upset about it anymore and I'm going to do this. So it was a really big moment for me because quite often I'd make commitments to myself at 18 years old and, you know, things wouldn't come to fruition or anything like that. But I knew in my heart for this particular thing that I was so determined at that point to really get started. So basically that was a turning point for me. And sometimes it is just drawing that line of, okay, no more thinking about this, no more worrying about it. I just want to move forward. I'm going to do this and really making that commitment to yourself. This is actually bringing me to my next point as well, which it's a pretty common saying and it might be a little bit cliche, but feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I can't explain to you how much this was essentially me in one sentence as an 18-year-old starting my business. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I wanted to do though. I knew what I wanted to do in terms of my creative career and where I wanted to be, and I just didn't know how to get there. So I think although I was so incredibly fearful, and I still remember my first and second photo shoot that I ever did, and I was incredibly nervous. I was shaking the whole time. I was so jittery. I even had to do the model's makeup on the first shoot that I ever did. And I'm pretty sure I was holding my makeup brush like this, just like trying to do her eye makeup. I felt so embarrassed at the time, but I was obviously extremely nervous for my first couple of photo shoots. The second photo shoot I ever had, I had more of a team on board. So I had a makeup artist, I had a stylist, and then we also had the model. So there was a group of about 4 or 5 of us doing these photos, and I was incredibly intimidated on that day. I felt so much fear of doing this shoot, but it was kind of something about it. I think getting behind the camera, and when I finally did get behind the camera, once everything else was out of the way and organized and ready to go, I just felt that adrenaline rush and I was ready to go. I felt more comfortable. When you're in your element, when you're doing your creative work, I think we can all attest to this, that it's a totally different feeling. And sometimes you can have 500 people watching what you're doing, but when you are focused, when you are doing that job that you kind of feel like you're born to do or you're really, really determined to do, there's something like adrenaline that just really helps you push through that. And I think that this is where that saying really rings true. Feeling the fear and doing it anyway is just something that most of us have to accept will be a part of our lives at some point. And I think for a lot of us who are starting creative businesses, there's so much fear based around doing this and so much overwhelm, but feeling that and just committing to doing it anyway, that is going to be the most important thing that you do in the end. Another quick side note on that first story of my first ever photo shoot, which just made things so much worse. I remember that it was pouring rain, but I was still so determined to do this photo shoot on this day. It was kind of like a dark Snow White kind of themed photo shoot as well. I wasn't really super into the fashion elements at that point, so I was kind of doing more creative stuff with my photography. And the first model I'd ever worked with, this poor girl was in this dress. She was cold, she was wet. I felt so bad for her. And then to make things even better, we were on this mountainside amongst the trees in the forest, and there were leeches basically everywhere that were crawling up our legs. Unfortunately, that was just one thing that I really could have done without that day because I was already so nervous. So that was kind of crummy that ended up happening, but it's a funny story to remember for my first photo shoot ever. So I think the these 2 points that I've just spoken about are really important, because if you've got a personality type that's similar to mine, so if you've done the Myers-Briggs kind of personality test, which I think is really, really fascinating and interesting to do if you haven't done it already. But as I mentioned, I'm an INFP. So in a sense, that means I'm not specifically very well tuned to organization. It's not something that necessarily comes naturally to me. I feel that these days I am quite an organized person because I do things in a way that suits my personality type and suits me. So I've had to find systems that really just work for me a lot better and that may not necessarily be the standard organization systems. But being an INFP also kind of makes me pretty terrible with decision making at times, and I really struggle with this. It's a lot of paralysis by analysis, and sometimes I can make some decisions based off emotional feeling rather than the thinking mindset where I'm approaching things from maybe a perspective that could be a lot more cool, calm, and collected. I can approach things that can be from quite an emotional standpoint. So I do need to kind of keep myself in check sometimes. And this is all things that when it comes to business is really important to understand and kind of adapt to these sort of systems a little bit more, even though it might be kind of going against the grain for what you stand for or how you act in your day-to-day life. So this is why it's really good to just kind of draw those lines, commit, start to really remind yourself that this is something that you want to do, and really do the research when it comes to business, because it's only going to help you out in the end, and really familiarize yourself with how certain systems work with business, because I can't recommend that enough from being someone who was so introverted, who can be very terrible with decision making and things like that. And to be honest, all of that stuff and knowing how I can be with my personality does give me quite a bit of anxiety sometimes when I think about myself and my business. It makes me do a lot of self-doubt as well. So I think, again, it's really just feeling that fear, doing it anyway, committing to things, and not necessarily going back to any thought processes that are going to overwhelm you. Or really, if you're telling yourself that you can't do things, it's a good way to sort of get in the habit of not doing that and kind of really having that positive self-speak as well. Another thing I would highly recommend for you to keep in mind if you are really worried about starting a creative business or fearful or not sure where to start, I would say do it for future you. I think this is a really good perspective to look at, because when I think back to when I was 18 years old, and in that moment when I was thinking about the girl that I used to speak to online who was doing so well with her photography, and in that 3 years I felt like I hadn't done enough or I hadn't done anything, I feel like in that moment I really pictured myself if I had done that, if I had used those 3 years to move forward and to do those things and to push forward and not be completely overwhelmed by fear. And I really felt sad in that moment because I thought, well, I could have had those 3 years put towards what I was doing. I could have really made use of that time. I could have been living my dream by now. And I think a lot of people have these regrets throughout their lifetime. And even though I'm saying this from a standpoint of it being basically my 18-year-old self, which, like I mentioned, that is extremely young. And now that I think about it, I definitely shouldn't have been so hard on myself. And really none of us should be too hard on ourselves for this kind of thing. Because yes, of course, there might be a best time to start something, but the second best time is now. So always remember that. And remember that you're doing it for your future self. Imagine your future self thanking you in years' time, and always imagine that lifestyle or that life that you want for yourself and that creative business that you want, and how future you would be thriving at this point, and how you can kind of help yourself to reach that. And make sure you remind yourself that you're doing it for them. You're really putting in this effort, you're breaking through for them. Also remember that there are millions of people out there who have started exactly where you have, in your position, not knowing anything about business maybe, or lacking a lot of self-confidence, being introverted, not knowing where to start. There are millions of people out there who have been in the exact same positions as you. So don't ever think that you're in this alone, because so many people have started at this point before. And even when you're looking at your inspirations, whether that be on social media, online, I think it's really good to remind yourself too when you're looking at your inspirations, just so you don't sort of relapse into a way of thinking where you're not good enough and you're not as good as them. I think it's a really good way to imagine yourself in their position when they first started, because they have been in your position at some point or another. Maybe you are the same age as these people, and maybe you feel like you could be further along in life, but at the same time, everyone is on their different timelines, and that is something really important to remember when you're starting businesses, when you're really wanting to live out your passions and your dreams. Just remember that these people have always started at your point at some point. So it's not something that you'll ever really have to go through alone, even though it can feel like that sometimes. So I hope you really enjoyed this video today, and let me know if you liked it down in the comments section below. And also make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Also let me know down in the comments section if you're thinking about starting a creative business this year, and if you're having any fears or anxieties about about this. I'd love to really create a conversation about this in the comments. Also, let me know what you'd like to see on my channel because I would love to hear any requests. I'm always still figuring out what kind of content you guys want to see on this channel, so I'd really love to hear your thoughts. But thank you so much as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.